Over time, though, despite Gandhi's efforts, protests did become largely violent. So, some of the most violent cases of these protests took place in the city of Amritsar. The British, in response, sent Brigadier General Reginald E.H. Dyer to restore order in the city. Dyer, as a result, got a little bit out of control and started to declare martial law, shutting down the city and forbidding any large gatherings of people. Unsurprisingly, people largely did not listen to Dyer's warning, and a crowd of about 10,000 people gathered in the city anyway. So what I'd like you to do, take a look at this primary source document. This is an account from the Amritsar Massacre. It's actually written by Winston Churchill, the future Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II. He writes, "The Indians were packed together so that one bullet would drive through 3 or 4 bodies. The people ran madly this way and the other. When fire was directed upon the center, they ran to the sides. The fire was then directed to the sides. Many threw themselves down on the ground, and the fire was then directed to the ground. This was continued for 8 or 10 minutes, and it stopped only when the ammunition had reached the point of exhaustion." So take a moment and answer this question in your notes. What took place during the Amritsar Massacre? As you saw in the actual document, just to go back for a moment, this was not an accident. We've talked about many massacres taking place throughout world history that began because of some sort of anxiety or some sort of mistake. But take a look at this. The fire was actually following the crowd. This was done completely out of malice, a true massacre, to say the least. So again, feel free to pause this video for a moment so that you can respond to this question if need be. This event has gone down in history as the Amritsar Massacre. Dyer ordered officers to fire on the protesters. About 379 people were killed, 1,137 were wounded. And you can see this portrayed over here on the right in this painting of the massacre taking place, with fallen Indians on the ground and the officials firing on them from the right. So why is this event so important to our story? This massacre is going to push Indians to seek for full independence from Great Britain, a true turning point in the story of Indian home rule. Even the British public were totally horrified by this event. Newspapers were lined with images and headlines reading out about the massacre taking place in the British colony. Unsurprisingly, Dyer was forced into retirement. For our final primary source document for today, I want you to read this along with me and then respond to the question that follows. This is another document coming from Gandhi titled Soul Force. He writes, "Passive resistance is a method of securing rights by personal suffering. It is the reverse of resistance by arms. When I refuse to do a thing that is repugnant to my conscience, I use soul force. For instance, the government of the day has passed a law which is applicable to me. I do not like it, and if by using violence I force the government to repeal the law, I am employing what may be termed body force. If I do not obey the law and accept the penalty for its breach, I use soul force. It involves the sacrifice of self." So this document is particularly emblematic of the kind of figure that Gandhi really is. So take a moment, pause this video if you need to, and answer this question. What type of protest is Gandhi proposing for the Indian people to use? So, as you saw in that previous document, Gandhi was arguing not to use violent protest, but instead to use something a little bit different: soul force, peaceful protest. civil disobedience, as he would say. Gandhi became a unifying symbol in India for many different reasons, and you'll see the evolution of him in many of these photographs on the sides of the text in this presentation. He encouraged Indians to make their own clothing, quit their British jobs, and boycott British goods. None of these things directly hurting anyone, murdering anyone, or causing any sort of physical harm, but sending a powerful message nonetheless. By quitting their British jobs, boycotting those British goods, it severely hurt the British economy. And through this civil disobedience, Gandhi was able to communicate a much stronger message than by simply protesting violently. Figures like Martin Luther King Jr. would later evoke people like Gandhi in their message, in their mission to achieve their goal. In Martin Luther King Jr.'s case, civil rights. So by simply refusing to follow these laws, the message was conveyed. Protest nonviolently, and you will find success. So, very briefly, I want to turn your attention to a symbol you may have seen a few times, but may not necessarily have known what the purpose of it was. And that's the spinning wheel. So Gandhi adopted the image of the spinning wheel as a symbol of defiance. Don't forget, India was known as the jewel in the crown because of their production of so many different resources, most notably being cloth and textiles. So, the stopped spinning wheel becomes a symbol of defiance. Take a look at this. This is an image of the Indian flag with a spinning wheel as it was featured in the Indian National Congress. A few years later, after India achieved its independence, the wheel was adopted once again, and this is what the flag of India looks like today. All coming from Gandhi's image of the spinning wheel from the time of his protests. Our last subtopic for this presentation is the Salt March. And I think that this is one of the most emblematic of Gandhi's protests because it so clearly symbolizes the type of civil disobedience that he was pointing to. So, in 1930, the British significantly increased the tax on salt in India. As a result, Gandhi and 78 of his supporters marched 240 miles to the Indian Ocean. All along the way, they would stop in local villages, in towns, and they would encourage Indians to simply ignore the salt laws, not protest violently, not rise up, but practice civil disobedience. Simply disobey. Ultimately, Gandhi declared that he would take 1 pinch of salt from the sea, therefore breaking the law, going around the British and taking salt from someone other than them. And you can see this pictured over here on the right. Here, this is Gandhi plucking 1 pinch of salt from the sea. So Gandhi remains a prevalent image even in modern day. Many protesters, many movements have evoked Gandhi and the type of protesting that he advocated. Despite Gandhi's efforts, hostility really continued in India for several years to come. However, in 1948, India did finally achieve independence from Great Britain after so many years. At the beginning of world civilizations, we talked about ancient India, the rise of rulers like Akbar and Aurangzeb, and Great Britain ultimately coming to possess India, and here we are moving toward the end of our course, and India is only just now achieving its independence. Sadly, Gandhi was assassinated 6 months after this goal was finally achieved at the age of 78, while marching to perform a prayer vigil doing what he always wanted to.